They let me keep the doctor, but not the dignity. I'm Dr. Eric Dalton, a title that now feels like an epitaph chiseled onto the door of a janitor's closet. And this is my closet, a beige cubicle in the sub-basement of the Space Telescope Science Institute, a place where careers with upward trajectories don't visit. My official job is Junior Data Integrity Analyst, which is a polite way of saying I watch progress bars and flag corrupt image files before they get to the real scientists upstairs. I'm a data janitor, mopping up digital noise for men who used to be my peers. It was 3 a.m, the only time the building felt truly mine. This was the hour I lived for. The hour I could do the work that mattered. The work that had cost me everything. I slid a worn flash drive into the terminal's port. On it was Charles's ghost, Dr. Charles Avery. He was my mentor, the man who saw the spark in me 30 years ago, and the one who first saw the anomalies in the old cosmic background radiation maps. He called them impossible gravitational signatures, structured ripples in space-time where nothing should be. He theorized that the light from the universe's infancy was being bent by something. It was a theory that got him laughed out of every conference from Pasadena to Geneva. It branded him a crank, and me, his loyal protege, as collateral damage. He put his career on that pyre. Then, one day, he just vanished. No note, no trace. He just wasn't there anymore. And now the first deep-field data from the Webb telescope was here. The most powerful eye humanity had ever built, staring back to the dawn of time. Upstairs, they were all looking for the first galaxies. They were hunting for the things they expected to find. I was hunting for the one thing Charles swore was there. The drive held his last creation, a set of analytical algorithms so radical, so unorthodox, they were considered computational heresy. A digital skeleton key, he'd called it, designed to look at the empty space between the lights. I pulled up the raw telemetry from Webb's first 24-hour exposure, a patch of sky that looked like a sliver of black velvet sprinkled with diamond dust. Every regulation in my employment contract screamed at me not to do this. This was a firing offense, maybe even a criminal one. But my hands were steady. When you've already fallen to the bottom of the well, you stop being afraid of heights. I executed the program. There was no fanfare, just a simple command line interface and a progress bar that crawled across the screen with agonizing slowness. 1%. 2. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped thing, frantic and blind. I was just reproving a madman's delusion. That's what I told myself. A final goodbye to Charles's ghost, a way to put it to rest so I could finally move on. Maybe get a job teaching physics at some community college that didn't read the academic journals. The bar hit 100%. The screen resolved into a complex wireframe overlay on the deep field image. A silent choke seized me, like the vacuum of space had crept into the room. It wasn't a smudge on the lens. It wasn't a data glitch or a processing artifact. It was a pattern, a repeating geometric pattern. The light from 1,000 of the oldest, most distant galaxies, galaxies born in the universe's first moments, was being bent. Not randomly like it would by a dark matter halo or some rogue nebula. It was being manipulated, focused, channeled. Charles was right. He was right about everything. It wasn't a collection of individual anomalies. It was a single, coherent structure. A non-physical network of gravity channels woven into the fabric of reality itself. A gravitational architecture stitched across the cosmos, too vast and precise to belong to nature. Something had built a lens at the edge of creation, and we had just looked right through it. I didn't save the data. I just snatched the flash drive from the port and walked out of my cubicle, leaving the wireframe ghost glowing on my screen for anyone to see. I walked towards the elevator bank. My mind was a roaring vacuum. The structure, the pattern. It had burned away every coherent thought, leaving only a single frantic impulse. Show someone. Protocol demanded I write a report, submit it through channels, and wait weeks for a junior analyst's flag to be ignored. I didn't have weeks. I jabbed the elevator button for the 5th floor, the executive level, a place I'd only ever seen in orientation videos. The polished steel doors slid shut, sealing me inside the small, ascending box. In the reflection, I saw a stranger. A man with wide, haunted eyes, his face pale and slick with sweat. I looked like a lunatic. Maybe I was. Maybe this was how it felt to finally go over the edge Charles had flirted with for so long. The elevator chimed, the doors opening onto a hallway of dark wood and brushed metal. At the far end, a single line of light shone from beneath a door. Dr. Jonathan Quinn, director. Dr. Quinn was an astrophysicist of some repute before he became a full-time administrator. A man famous for 2 things: his almost preternatural ability to secure funding and a deep, unnerving calm. I'd seen him speak once at an all-hands meeting. He had a way of looking at you that felt less like he was listening and more like he was taking a quiet inventory of your soul. My knuckles rapped against the heavy wood of his door, the sound cannon shots in the stillness. I didn't wait for an answer. I pushed the door open. Quinn wasn't at his desk. He was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the first grey blush of dawn over the Baltimore skyline. The office was sparse, clean, more like a meditation chamber than a place of work. No clutter, no photos, just a single large painting on the wall, an abstract swirl of blacks and deep blues that suddenly looked less like art and more like a map. He turned, and there was no surprise on his face. "Dr. Dalton," he said. His voice was soft, but it filled the soundproofed room. "I was wondering when you would finally do it. Please, come in. Close the door." I did as he said. The lock clicked shut. My frantic, rehearsed speech died in my throat. You knew!" I managed, the words feeling clumsy in my mouth. "I knew Charles gave you his algorithms," Quinn said, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs facing his desk. "And I knew that with the Webb's new data, a man of your unique, shall we say, intellectual compulsions wouldn't be able to resist. It was only a matter of time." I didn't sit. I stood in the middle of the room feeling like a specimen under glass. The flash drive was a useless lump of plastic in my fist. "Then you've seen it? The structure? The gravitational channels?" Quinn gave a small, sad smile. "We don't call it the structure, Eric. We call it the noumenon." He said the word with a kind of reverence, like a priest naming his god. A term for a reality that is conceivable, but can never be directly experienced. An appropriate name, we thought. "We. The Shepherds," he said, moving to sit behind his large, empty desk. "An organization founded about 75 years ago. A small group of scientists, philosophers, and officials who understood the truth when the first radio telescope anomalies started appearing. The truth that humanity is not an accident. We are a project, an experiment planted and cultivated by that vast, ancient intelligence you just saw the shadow of." This wasn't a confession. It was a lecture, an orientation. He wasn't scared. He was indoctrinating me. "You're a cult," I whispered. "Faith is a component, I admit," Quinn conceded calmly. "But we are based in fact. For decades, our entire purpose has been not to hide this truth, but to manage it. To guide humanity toward the moment of reunion. We are shepherds, yes, guiding our flock home." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine, his serene expression finally showing a hint of something else. Something that looked like pity. "And you, Eric, you've just brought it all to its conclusion." I stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? I found proof. We have to warn people." "Warn them of what? Their own salvation?" He shook his head slowly. The observation wasn't a passive act. The noumenon's network is not just a lens, it's a sensor. It was designed to react to focused, intelligent observation. You're running Charles's program on the Webb's data. That was the final key turning in a very old lock. It was the signal they were waiting for. Confirmation that their experiment had reached maturity. He stood up and walked back to the window, gazing out at the waking city. This is the attunement, the great and final alignment of consciousness, and it isn't coming, Eric, it's already begun. My thoughts stuttered and collapsed, trying to find purchase on the smooth, polished horror of Quinn's words. The attunement, a reunion. He spoke of the end of human history as if it were a long-awaited holiday. My legs felt weak, and I sank into one of the chairs he'd indicated earlier. A part of my brain, the rational scientist part, was screaming that this was a delusion, a shared psychosis of a powerful few. But the gravitational structure burned behind my eyes. It was real. And if it was real, then maybe he was too. What happens now? Now, you acclimate, Quinn said, his tone shifting from prophetic to therapeutic. He walked over to a section of the panelled wall and pressed his palm against the wood. A nearly invisible seam appeared, and a door opened. I'm not a monster, Eric. I'm a shepherd. I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to understand. The evidence is all here. Everything we've gathered since 1947. See for yourself. The truth will bring you peace. He gestured me into a small, windowless room containing nothing but a single chair and a terminal embedded in a desk of the same dark wood. As the door slid shut behind me, I noticed a tiny, dark lens, no bigger than a pinhead, set into the wall above the monitor. A cage with a comfortable chair. Quinn wasn't trying to convince me. He was putting me under observation. My survival depended on the performance I gave. I sat down. The screen glowed to life with a single, elegant symbol, 3 concentric circles, and a search bar. This was the Shepherd's Archive, their Bible. I began to play my part. I typed in the keywords Quinn would expect a man in my position to search for. Webb telescope. Gravitational lensing. First contact. The system returned curated files, sanitized research papers, and heavily redacted government reports. It was an echo chamber of their dogma, designed to lead any mind down a single, well-trodden path to their version of enlightenment. I clicked through them, letting my face show awe, then confusion, then dawning acceptance. I leaned forward, stared at the screen as if grappling with a new and profound reality. I hoped the camera could see the convincing sheen of sweat on my brow, but my mind wasn't on salvation. It was on Charles. After an hour of playing the good convert, I made my move. Typing Charles Avery into the search bar would be a red flag. His name was anathema, so I searched for his work instead. I typed in the official designation of his most infamous paper on cosmic microwave background anomalies, JAP77b. A single file appeared. Its designation was simple, chilling. Asset surveillance log, Avery, Charles. I clicked it open. It wasn't a research file, it was a dossier, years of it. Photos of Charles walking to his car, transcripts of phone calls, summaries of emails. They had watched him for over a decade. They had documented his descent from respected academic to ostracized pariah. They'd watched as his theories grew more radical, his behavior more erratic. They watched everything. I scrolled down through years of meticulous, soulless observation. I was reading a man's life being hollowed out, entry by entry. The final entries were from the week he disappeared. They were terse. Asset has ceased all external communication. Asset has not left his residence in 72 hours. Final retrieval protocol initiated. They hadn't just watched him. They had taken him. Near the bottom of the log was a subfolder labeled Recovered Device Data. It was mostly junk, corrupted files, partial downloads from a computer they must have seized. Most were unreadable. But one fragment, a text file recovered from a corrupted hard drive sector, opened. It was a partial personal log written by Charles himself. Most of the text was a jumble of alphanumeric garbage, but a few legible phrases stood out from the digital noise like bones sticking out of the mud. Resonance signal is the key. They will broadcast a harmonic frequency to overwrite, a song to unmake the self. And then, a final clear line. Counter theory is sound. A targeted dissonance pulse broadcast at the point of amplification could disrupt the cascade. The feedback to the broadcaster, catastrophic, but it would give them a choice. Dissonance pulse. It was the language of warfare. My mentor hadn't just been studying the noumenon, he'd been designing a weapon to fight it. And somewhere in the ruins of his life, there had to be a blueprint. I scanned the surveillance log again, recovered device data. They took his computer, his hard drives. But a man like Charles, a man who saw invisible structures at the edge of the universe, wouldn't keep his most dangerous thoughts in a place that could be carried out in a box. He would have used their own network against them. He would have hidden it right here, in their digital fortress, under their noses. I closed the file. What would he use as a key? Not a name, not a place. Something only I, or someone who had worked elbow to elbow with him, would know. Something meaningless to anyone else. And then I had it. Project Blackline. It was the unofficial name for a project we'd poured 2 years of our lives into. An attempt to find a theoretical particle that ended in spectacular, career-damaging failure. I typed a new command into the terminal. A decryption command, targeting the parent folder of the junk files. A new file shimmered into existence in the directory. It was labeled simply Charles Finch, Personal Final Log. This was it. I opened the file. The text was clean, uncorrupted. It was like hearing Charles's voice in my head, stripped of all its usual wry humor, leaving only a desperate clarity. Entry 112. The resonance isn't just a signal. It's a biological imperative delivered via physics. It's not designed to kill the body, but to colonize the mind. It uses the human neural network as a substrate, a blank slate onto which it can imprint a new collective consciousness. It's a song that sings you out of existence. I scrolled down. Entry 114. The counter theory holds a dissonance pulse, a chaotic high-energy signal tuned to the specific quantum signature of human consciousness. It wouldn't be a shield. You can't block a tide that's already flowing through you. It would be a jamming signal, introducing so much targeted noise into the neural architecture that the resonance harmonic fails. The new consciousness can't take hold if the substrate is vibrating too violently. The theory was sound. It was beautiful. I scrolled faster, looking for schematics, for instructions. I found the final entry. Entry 117. Eric, if you are reading this, then you saw the pattern, and they saw you. I'm sorry. The math on the feedback loop is unforgiving. I thought the broadcaster could be a machine, an AI. I was wrong. The signal requires a living mind to generate its specific chaotic signature. It needs a human brain to act as the primary amplifier, the biological focus. The dissonance pulse cannot be broadcast without the broadcaster absorbing the full, unfiltered backlash of the energy required to save everyone else. It's a cascade of synaptic failures, a neurological supernova. It's not a sacrifice, it's self-immolation. I read the words and the hope inside me curdled into ash. The weapon was real, and using it was a death sentence, a grotesque, self-inflicted execution at the speed of light. I forced myself to be still, to keep my face stitched into calm concentration for the pinhole lens in the wall. The log wasn't finished. There was one last paragraph. I don't have time to build it. They are coming for me. The components are scattered, designs disguised as failed experiments. But I left a key. Not with you, Eric. You believe too much. You would see the pattern and try to be the hero. You need an anchor. You need the man who argued with me for a decade that I was chasing ghosts. He's the only one I ever trusted to check my math, to tell me I was a fool. And he's the only one who might have the pieces I sent him without knowing what they were. Your skepticism is our last shield, old friend. Ben Keller holds the keystone. University of Maryland Physics Department. Go to him. Trust him. The log ended. I slowly closed the file, then used the same command key to encrypt it again. wiping it from view. I scrubbed the terminal's command history clean. I sat back in the chair, took one deep, slow breath and let it out. The truth was no longer an intellectual problem. It was a physical burden. A loaded gun with my name on the side. Quinn wanted me to find peace in this room. Instead, I had found a purpose, wrapped in a shroud. I stood up and walked to the door. When Quinn opened it, he would see a new convert. He would see a man shattered and remade by a terrible truth. And he would be right. But it wouldn't be his truth. It would be Charles's. And my first act of faith would be to carry it out of this building, straight to Dr. Ben Keller. I walked out of the archive room and met Quinn's eyes. I let my shoulders slump. I let my expression go slack with the weight of a cosmos that was suddenly, terrifyingly full. I gave him the performance of a man whose every certainty had been atomized. He nodded slowly, a serene proprietary smile touching his lips. He saw exactly what he expected to see. "It is a great burden, this knowledge," he said, his voice soft as falling ash. "Go home, Dr. Dalton. Rest. Let the truth settle. We will speak again tomorrow. There is much to prepare for." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like the closing of a lock. "A car is waiting for you downstairs. We'll see you home safely." I gave him a shaky nod and left. The drive back to my soulless apartment complex was a silent study in paranoia. The car was a black town car, the driver a man with a placid face and eyes that never quite met mine in the rearview mirror. When he dropped me off, I saw him pull to the curb a block down and cut the engine. They were settling in for the night. I went inside, made a show of turning on lights, pacing past the window. Then I went into my bedroom, pulled on a dark sweatshirt, and slipped out the fire escape. The 15-foot drop to the alley below sent a shock up my legs, but the pain was a welcome, grounding sensation. I was a ghost in my own city now, sticking to the shadows, my mind chanting a single name like a mantra. Ben Keller, University of Maryland. It took me almost 2 hours on foot and via a series of rambling, anonymous city buses to get to the College Park campus. The physics department building was an ugly slab of 70s brick and concrete, but tonight it looked like a cathedral. I knew the layout from a dozen visits in better times. I also knew that men like my shepherd shadow wouldn't be able to follow me through a crowded, chaotic building. I waited until a large group of students exited a late-night lecture, then slipped into the stream, using their bodies as cover to get inside. Ben's office was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long, dim hallway lined with peeling bulletin boards. His door was ajar, a sliver of warm light spilling out. I could hear the faint scratching of a pen on paper. I pushed the door open without knocking. He looked up, startled. Dr. Ben Keller hadn't changed much in 5 years. Thinner on top, thicker in the middle, same wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. His office was a disaster zone of stacked journals, sprawling textbooks and coffee-stained mugs. The comfortable chaos of a man at home in his work. "Eric!" His eyes widened. "What in God's name are you doing here?" "Ben, I need your help," I said, my voice coming out as a breathless rasp. I shut the door behind me. "There's no time to explain everything, but you have to listen." He leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from surprise to a weary concern I knew all too well. "Eric, are you all right? I heard what happened with the Institute. If you need to talk—" "No, you don't understand," I said, stepping closer to his desk. I lowered my voice. "It's about Charles. He was right. About everything." Ben sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was a gesture of infinite patience I had seen 1,000 times during our arguments over Avery's work. "Eric, we've been over this. Charles went down a rabbit hole. It was tragic, but he lost his way." "He didn't lose his way, Ben. He was taken by people who have known about this for decades. They're called the Shepherds. They have a facility in Baltimore. They showed me things, a structure at the edge of the universe, a harvest of consciousness, a resonance signal." I saw the change in his eyes. The concern was hardening into clinical assessment. He was looking at a man having a psychotic break. "Okay, Eric, okay, let's sit down. I'll make some coffee." "I don't have time for coffee." I slammed my hand on his desk, sending a stack of papers skittering to the floor. "Damn it, Ben. You're the check the math guy." That's what he said. "You're the anchor." "He said?" Ben stood up, his posture stiffening. "You've spoken to Charles?" "No, I read his last log." The words weren't enough. They would never be enough for a man who lived by proof. My mind flashed back to the archive room, to the data Quinn had shown me, the curated evidence. And I remembered one file in particular. I grabbed a pen from his desk, turned to the large whiteboard behind him, a chaotic mess of half-erased tensor calculus, and wiped a space clean with my sleeve. "What are you doing?" "Proving it." I started to draw. A map, a wave propagation diagram. They had predictive models, Ben. Models for how their signal would spread across the globe, hemisphere by hemisphere. I sketched the curved lines, the amplification nodes centered over major population centers, the decay rates over the oceans. It was a horrific, elegant piece of physics. "The math is sound, wave resonance theory. You could probably do it yourself in an afternoon." Ben watched me, his arms crossed. "It's a theoretical model, so what?" I stopped drawing and turned to face him. I wrote a single line at the bottom of the map. "Date of origin, November 4th, 1972. I watched his face. He stared at the whiteboard, his eyes tracing the lines I'd drawn. Then they settled on the date. He walked closer. He reached out and touched the board as if to make sure it was real. 1972? He whispered. That's impossible. The processing power to model this, the neuroresonance data, it didn't exist. It still doesn't exist." "They have it," I said quietly. "They've had it for a long time." The color drained from his face. The skepticism, the armor he had worn for a decade, shattered into a million pieces. He was seeing it not as a madman's scrawl, but as a piece of data, an impossible, terrifying piece of data. He finally looked at me, his expression one of pure horror. "My God, Eric, it's real." At that exact moment, his computer, which had been idle on his desk, chimed. A small, innocuous notification. An email had arrived. Ben glanced at the screen. "What is it?" I asked. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a new, immediate terror. "It's from the university's network security. A Priority 1 security alert. That's them. They're here," I said, the words feeling like ice in my throat. Ben stared at me, then back at the screen. The theoretical problem on his whiteboard had just crashed through his office door. "How? How could they know you're here?" "They're watching you, Ben, because Charles mentioned you in his log." Ben stumbled back from his desk, knocking his chair over. He wasn't a man of action. He was a man of thought, and his thoughts were now a screaming vortex of panic. "The components," he whispered, his eyes wide. "Oh God, the components." "What components? What did Charles send you?" I grabbed his arm, my fingers digging into his tweed jacket. "I didn't know what they were," he stammered, pointing a finger toward a framed schematic on his wall, a complex design for a quantum computing core. "He sent me pieces over the years, 4 packages, delivered by private courier. He said they were prototypes, novel quantum processors for a project he was pitching. He said they needed to be kept in stable, low-temperature conditions. I thought he was just being eccentric. I stored them in the cryophysics lab in the sub-basement. It's the most secure, temperature-stable facility on campus." Charles delivered the weapon piece by piece, right into the hands of the one man who wouldn't understand its significance until it was too late. We had to get to them. "We don't have time," Ben said, gesturing wildly toward the door. "They'll have this building locked down in minutes. We're trapped." My mind was suddenly sharp, clear. The fear was still there, but it was a tool now, honing my thoughts to a razor's edge. "You're not a prisoner here, Ben. You're a professor. You have access. You can create a diversion." A diversion? Like pulling a fire alarm? They'll expect that. It has to be something else. Something only a physics department would have. Something that will scramble every emergency team on campus and force a full evacuation. Ben's panicked eyes darted around his office, then settled. The chemical stores, he said slowly. There's a monitoring system for volatile compounds. If I remotely spoof the sensor readings for the hydrogen fluoride gas, it'll trigger a level 1 hazardous material alert. They'll evacuate the entire science quad. It'll cause chaos. Do it, I said. He scrambled to his computer, lines of code scrolled across the screen. I'm routing it through a dead server in Germany. It'll take them hours to trace it back to this terminal. A moment later, he looked up. Done. We have maybe 5 minutes before the alarms go off. We didn't wait. We slipped out of his office and ran. Seconds later, a new alarm began to sound. A series of deep, guttural whoops, punctuated by a synthesized voice calmly repeating, "Evacuate. Hazardous material release detected." Doors opened. Confused students and faculty began to trickle out into the corridors. We moved against the current, pushing our way towards the emergency stairwell. We descended into the guts of the building. The cryophysics lab was sealed behind a heavy steel door with a biometric hand scanner and a keypad. Ben slapped his hand on the scanner. A green light flashed. He entered his access code. The lock buzzed, then flashed red. Secondary authentication required. "What is that?" I hissed. "Random security protocol. It emails a one-time code to the head of the department. We're locked out." Behind us, up the stairwell, we could hear the heavy tread of booted feet moving methodically downwards, ignoring the evacuation alarm. My mind raced back to Charles's logs, to the hours spent arguing with him in his study, surrounded by books on number theory and chaos mathematics. "Try his birthday," I said. 8 digits. October 22nd, 1961. Ben typed it in. The lock buzzed red. "Damn it, think!" Ben whispered frantically. The footsteps were closer now. I looked at the keypad, at the numbers, and then I saw the ghost of a pattern. Charles's obsession. Prime numbers. Not the date itself, used the previous prime years. I shoved Ben aside. "What are you doing?" "What were the 2 largest prime numbers before 1961? I said, my mind blanking under the pressure. 1951 and 1949. I punched in the 8 digits. The lock clicked open. We scrambled inside. The lab was a frigid chamber, bathed in the low blue light of cooling systems. In the center of the room was a large cylindrical cryo-storage unit. Ben worked the console, his breath misting in the cold air, and with a hiss of vapor, a drawer slid open. Inside, nestled in precisely molded foam, were 4 objects. They were flat, black, ceramic-looking wafers, each about the size of my palm, etched with fractal patterns. They felt inert, heavy, and colder than the air around them. This was Charles's dissonance pulse. I grabbed 2 of the cryogenic cases. Ben grabbed the other 2. We sprinted out of the lab down a concrete service corridor. A heavy steel door at the far end was our only way out. As I slammed my shoulder against the push bar, the door to the lab we'd just exited burst open. 2 men stood there, dressed in simple black fatigues. They didn't shout or raise any weapons. They just started moving toward us with a calm, terrifying speed. We burst out into the cold night air. We were in a deserted loading dock, surrounded by dumpsters and darkness. We didn't stop. We just ran, clutching the hope of Charles's weapon in our hands, the sound of the shepherd's measured pursuit following us into the night. We ran for 2 days. Time became a smear of cheap motel rooms paid for with cash from Ben's emergency fund, greasy diner food, and the constant paranoia of being hunted. We stole a 20-year-old sedan from a long-term parking garage at Dulles Airport. Every passing police car sent a jolt of ice through my veins. We were 2 middle-aged academics in the wilderness, armed with 4 ceramic wafers in a knockoff cooler. I drove while Ben slept, his head against the passenger window. his face etched with a kind of fear I had only ever seen in textbooks on trauma. In the long, empty stretches of highway, my mind raced back to the shepherd's archive, to Charles's final log, a cryptic breadcrumb I hadn't understood until now. A single line of code at the very end of the file. Observe Wolf 359. It was Charles's star. It was the dim, unremarkable red dwarf where he first detected a faint, recurring anomaly in its light curve, a flicker so tiny that everyone else dismissed it as instrument noise. It was the first thread he pulled that unraveled his entire life. The shepherds would have seen it as a dead end, a sentimental footnote. But for Charles, it was Genesis. The coordinates, I said aloud, waking Ben with a start. What? What coordinates? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes. It wasn't a star, it was a pointer. He wanted us to look at the sky from the best possible vantage point on Earth to observe that specific star. A place with the driest air, the highest altitude, the least light pollution. Ben was silent for a long moment, the implications dawning on him. The Atacama, he breathed, the high desert in Chile. The journey south was a fever dream of borrowed money, forged documents from a man Ben knew in El Paso, and a bone-rattling flight on a cargo plane that smelled of oil and illegally harvested timber. The whole way, a strange feeling grew in me, a sense of disconnect from the people around us. I saw it in the vacant stares of toll booth operators, the slow, placid way a waitress would move, her eyes not quite tracking. It was a subtle wrongness, a quiet dimming. The attunement wasn't a future event, it was a tide, slowly, silently rising around us. We arrived in the Atacama Desert, a place that felt more like Mars than the Earth. The air was thin and knife-sharp, the landscape a brutal, beautiful canvas of red rock and salt flats under a sky of blue. Following a winding road up into the Andes, we finally saw the Atacama Grand Array. I'd seen pictures, of course. 66 massive radio telescopes spread across the high plateau. But this was not the place from the pictures. From a ridge a mile away, we saw the changes. The dishes, each one the size of a small building, had been subtly altered. Their gleaming white surfaces were now covered in a fine black mesh that drank the harsh sunlight, leaving no reflection. Thick, dark cables, unlike any terrestrial technology, snaked between them. Around the base of each antenna were structures that looked like heat sinks, but instead of radiating warmth, they were coated in a fine layer of frost, drawing heat from the air around them. It wasn't an observatory anymore. It was an amplifier. Ground Zero. My God, Ben whispered, his face pale from more than just the altitude. They've turned it into a weapon. We had to get closer, to understand the system we needed to hijack. We abandoned the car and began a grueling climbing trek through the rocky outcrops. As we crested the final ridge overlooking the central cluster of dishes, we froze. He was there. Dr. Jonathan Quinn stood alone in the center of the array, in a simple, practical jacket against the cold. He was looking directly at us, as if he'd been waiting for us to take our seats. There were no guards, no overt threat. Just him, a handful of his silent, black-clad agents moving calmly among the dishes, and the suffocating sense that we had not evaded their trap, but walked right into its center. Quinn raised a hand in a placid, welcoming gesture. His voice carried across the distance, amplified by the acoustics of the altered dishes, calm and clear as a bell. "Eric, Ben, welcome," he called out, his tone utterly devoid of surprise or anger. "I knew you would understand Charles's poetry eventually. All paths, even the ones of rebellion, lead to the same great shore. You've brought the final offering. Please, come down. It's almost time for the service to begin." Quinn's voice rolled over us as an invitation, a welcome to our own execution. Ben grabbed my arm, ready to bolt, but there was nowhere to run. We were miles from anything, in a landscape as open as an operating table. The silent shepherds at the base of the dishes turned to look at us, their movements synchronized, their faces blank. They weren't blocking our escape, they were simply observing it, as if our panic was just another predictable variable in their equation. "We don't run," I said. "We do what we came to do." Slowly, we walked down the rocky slope. As we reached the flat ground between the great dishes, Quinn walked to meet us, his expression one of paternal disappointment. "All this effort, Eric," he said, his voice now a conversational murmur. "All this pain and fear. For what? To delay the inevitable? To cling to the frantic, fleeting chaos you call an individual mind?" "We call it a choice." Quinn gave a sad, small smile. "The universe doesn't offer a choice between something and nothing, only between one state and the next. You see this as an invasion. We see it as the final, beautiful collapsing of the wave function. An end to loneliness, a reunion with the intelligence that seeded our very DNA into the Earth's primordial seas. Why are you so afraid of going home?" "Because I don't think our creators are welcoming us home," Ben cut in. "I think they're harvesting a crop." Quinn's gaze shifted to Ben. "Your mentor understood," he said to me, ignoring Ben. "Charles saw the beauty. In the end, he was ready to embrace it. You've corrupted his legacy with this desperate, violent resistance." That was the line. The one lie too many. "He wasn't embracing anything," I snarled. "You took him, and you took him because he designed this." I nodded toward the cooler Ben was clutching. Quinn's composure finally cracked. He sighed, a sound of genuine weariness. "The broadcast begins in minutes, Eric. The celestial alignment is perfect. The resonance signal is already propagating. Can't you feel it? The quiet? It's a pointless gesture." As he spoke, the thrumming from the dishes intensified. I felt a wave of placidity come over me, a feeling of deep, drowsy comfort. The sharp edges of my fear and anger began to blur, dissolving into a sense of pleasant apathy. Why was I fighting this? It felt so peaceful. Then I saw Ben. He had dropped the cooler and was clutching his head, his face contorted in agony. His mind, so used to the precise rigor of mathematics, was fighting the encroaching harmony. His pain was a splash of cold water in my face. It broke the spell. "Ben," I said, grabbing the cooler myself, "the interface. Where do we connect it?" He staggered, pointing a finger at the base of the central dish, the one Quinn stood beside. "The central nexus. The primary power conduit. It's the only place with enough energy to power the pulse." I ran, leaving Quinn standing there. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched, a silent priest observing a final, meaningless blasphemy. At the base of the massive antenna, I found a service panel. I ripped it open. Inside was a horrifying fusion of human and alien technology, fiber optic cables woven together with organic-looking conduits. Ben stumbled up beside me, pulling the 4 ceramic wafers from their cryogenic cases. "The processors have to be slotted in sequence," he gasped, his nose bleeding from the pressure. "It creates a feedback loop that taps into the main power flow." He began to slot them into the interface. The first wafer clicked into place. The thrumming from the dish faltered for a second, a discordant note in the cosmic song. The second wafer. The third. Ben was grunting with effort, fighting against the mental tide that was trying to pull him under. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror and a sudden terrible understanding. "Eric," he said, his voice choked, "the 4th slot. There's no 4th slot. It's not an interface for a device. Charles's design, it needs a biological component. It needs a human mind to complete the circuit." Charles's words from the log slammed into my memory. The broadcaster would have to act as a living, biological focus, a neurological supernova, self-immolation. It wasn't a flaw. It was the design. I looked from the empty 4th port on the interface to the side of the main console. There, waiting, was a small, circular induction port designed for neural diagnostics. It was clean and shaped to fit the final wafer perfectly. Ben saw it at the same moment I did. His face went ashen. the blood from his nose a stark red line against his pale skin. The weapon didn't need a final component. It needed a soul to burn as fuel. The harmonious thrum of the array deepened. It felt like sinking into a warm bath. My fear, my anger, my identity, all of it felt so heavy, so unnecessary. Why was I fighting so hard to hold on to it? Eric, lay down this burden. Quinn's voice was right behind me, calm and reasonable. Let it go. Charles saw the futility of this path. In the end, he would have chosen peace. He would have chosen to join us. It is the rational choice. I looked at Ben. He was on his knees now, his hands pressed to his temples. A low, wounded sound escaped his lips. He was fighting. He was choosing the pain. He was choosing to remain Ben Keller, a tenured but uninspired physics professor who liked his coffee too strong and his equations elegant. He was choosing the beautiful, messy, agonizing chaos of being human. In his struggle, I saw the flaw in Quinn's logic. This wasn't a reunion. It was a hostile takeover. I turned to face Quinn. I held the fourth wafer in my palm. It felt like a piece of frozen night. You're wrong about Charles. And you're wrong about this being a choice between something and nothing. I looked past him, at the altered dishes pointed at the sky, at the placid shepherds. I choose the chaos, I choose the pain, I choose the noise. I spun around and shoved Ben with all my strength toward a heavy door marked maintenance corridor. He stumbled backward, caught off guard. Get in there, I said. Now. He stared at me, his eyes wide with horror and understanding. I slammed the heavy steel door shut, the sound echoing across the plateau. I twisted the locking wheel, the thick metal bolts shooting home with a series of heavy thuds. I turned back to the console. The soothing song of the noumenon was a siren's call, trying to pull me under. I held the fourth wafer, its edges sharp against my skin. I took one last deep breath of the thin, cold air. Then I pressed the wafer into the neural port on my temple. There was a soft click. It wasn't pain, it was everything. The cold of the wafer was a torrent of pure information. My consciousness exploded. It wasn't a supernova, it was a big bang. Every memory I had, my first scraped knee, the taste of coffee this morning, the look on my mother's face in the hospital, the precise curve of a function in a textbook, all of it hit me in the same singular instant. I felt my own mind, my own self, Eric Dalton, shatter into a billion brilliant shards. And then I expanded. I felt the array as an extension of my own nervous system. I felt the resonance signal flowing through it. It was beautiful, perfectly ordered, and utterly alien. And into that perfect harmony, I screamed. A chaotic, dissonant, human scream of noise and static and memory and pain. I became the dissonance pulse. For a fraction of a second, I felt the network. I felt the billions of minds across the planet as the wave of attunement came over them. I felt millions of them go silent, their lights winking out in an instant. But I felt others, millions more, flicker and hold. I felt their confusion, their terror, their sudden shocking sovereignty as my scream of chaotic data shielded them. It was working. My last coherent thought wasn't for myself or for the world. It was a single silent word of thanks broadcast into the void. Charles. From the shielded corridor, Ben watched it all on a small, grime-covered security monitor. He saw Eric turn. He saw him lock the door, sealing him away. He saw him press the black wafer to his head. He saw Eric scream, a silent, raw-throated agony on the screen. And then the monitor went white. A flash of energy, of non-light, erupted from the main dish outside, so bright it overloaded the camera. The single, pervasive hum that had been pressing down on him for hours vanished. The silence that replaced it was absolute and terrifying. The pressure in his head was gone. He stumbled out of the corridor. Eric was gone. Where he had been standing, there was only a scorch mark on the console. Quinn and his agents were on their knees, clutching their heads, a look of spiritual shock on their faces, as if they had been yanked from the arms of God. Ben backed away. He stumbled into the observatory's main control room. On a massive screen, a map of the world was displayed. A moment ago, it had been a creeping wave of red. Now it was a shattered mosaic. Vast patches of North America, Europe, and Asia were still red, billions of minds silently erased. But just as vast were the patches of blue that had reappeared. South America, Africa, parts of the Pacific Rim. Millions upon millions were spared, left terrified and confused, but free. Eric's sacrifice hadn't been a perfect shield. It hadn't won the war, but it had turned an execution into a fight. Standing alone in the heart of the enemy's weapon, Ben Keller looked at the fractured map of a broken world. He was terrified. He was heartbroken, but for the first time since he'd learned the truth, he was not a victim. He was a survivor. Eric had exposed the truth and left behind the one thing humanity would need to fight back. He had given them a choice. It has been months since the sky went quiet. We call it the Great Silence. An estimated 3.2 billion people were stolen from the inside out. One moment they were there, the next, the light in their eyes went out, leaving the lamp still lit. We call them the Hollow. They are not dead, which is the cruelest part. They stand, they breathe, their hearts beat. They are placid shells, maintained by some invisible automated process, their minds wiped clean as a formatted drive. The red zones on the map are an open wound on the planet, continents of silent, breathing statues. I live in a basement now, beneath the geology department of a small, underfunded university in Montana. My world is a collection of servers humming on folding tables, powered by a jury-rigged connection to the campus grid. I sleep on a cot next to a seismograph I recalibrated to listen for subvocal, telluric frequencies. We're listening for whispers from the enemy. We are a handful of others. A SETI astronomer from New Mexico who recorded a spike of coherent noise on the day of the silence. A neuroscientist from Japan whose lab mice all suffered simultaneous catastrophic seizures, except for the ones being subjected to disruptive electrical stimulation. A signals intelligence officer who went AWOL from the NSA with terabytes of data on the Shepherds, an organization his superiors had told him was a benign philosophical foundation. We are the new generation of cranks and pariahs. We are Charles's children. My days are spent trying to reverse engineer a miracle. On a whiteboard, I have drawn the schematic of the dissonance pulse from memory over and over, trying to understand the physics of Eric's sacrifice. How do you quantify a man's soul being used as a processing core? How do you replicate that without another sacrifice? These are the questions that keep me awake. Quinn and his shepherds have faded into the background, but they haven't vanished. They are the new mystery cults, whispering to the desperate and the broken that the silence was a botched ascension, a paradise interrupted by a terrorist. They offer solace to those who lost everyone, promising that another alignment will come, that the communion can be completed. They are gathering followers. They are rebuilding. The war is now fought in the dark corners of the internet, and in the quiet, desperate hearts of the survivors. I keep a copy of Charles's final log on a single, air-gapped laptop. Sometimes late at night I read the last entry. I read the part about me, about my skepticism being a shield. He was wrong. My skepticism was a wall I built to keep the universe small and understandable. Eric tore that wall down. He didn't save the world. He just proved it was worth saving. He looked into the face of a peaceful, placid God and chose the screaming, agonizing, beautiful chaos of being human. He didn't give us a weapon. He gave us a reason to build one. He gave us the noise. And in the great, terrifying silence of the cosmos, it is the only thing we have left to fight with.